Hello, and we are back with our third episode reading Chinweizu's Decolonizing the African Mind. And this is the Afro Lit Digital Den, where we are reading necessary literature for our African liberation. This is brought to you by Ubuntu Learning Solutions, improving human performance and human benignity. Now, we are looking at Chinweizu, and I know Wikipedia is not a reputable source, but it gives us a good start on background information. Okay, so Chinweizu Ibikwe was born on the 26th of March, 1943 in Nigeria. So I'm going to attempt to pronounce these places. Elumoa, Isuikwato, Abia State. All right, so I tried. I'm trying. I'm getting in touch with my African roots, so please forgive me if I botch these names. Okay, he is a critic, poet, and journalist. His notable works include The West and the Rest of Us from 1975, and then Toward the Decolonization of African Literature in 1983. Okay, Chinweizu Ibikwe, known mononymously as Chinweizu, and also by the pen name Maazi Chinweizu, is a Nigerian critic, essayist, poet, and journalist. Now, while studying in the United States during the Black Power movement, Chinweizu became influenced by the philosophy of the Black arts movement. He is commonly associated with Black Orientalism and emerged as one of the leading figures in contemporary Nigerian journalism, writing a highly influential column in The Guardian of Lagos. And I have an image of Chinweizu brought to us by the Writers Project of Ghana. And here they say that Chinweizu is an anti-continentalism Pan-Africanist as well as a historian. He is writing a 7-volume book titled A Maafa-Centric History of Pan-Africanism. That sounds really good. Let's see, 1440 to 2015. His books include The West and the Rest of Us, Decolonizing the African Mind, Voices from 20th Century Africa, Anatomy of Female Power, Caliphate, Colonialism, The Taproot of the Trouble with Nigeria. He is a co-author of Towards the Decolonization of African Literature and a contributor to Volume 8 of the UNESCO General History of Africa. And if you don't have those volumes, I highly recommend that you download all of them. They are really good. His volume of poetry, that's Invocations and Admonitions, won the Association of Nigerian Authors, so ANA, Poetry Prize for 1985. He received a 2013 Silverbird Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution to African letters. So he's a relatively new author to me because a lot of my training has been in education, curriculum and instruction, as well as reading education, writing education. So my background is more of educational psychology, educational philosophy, and educational pedagogy. I am switching now to becoming an Afrocentric Pan-Africanist, focusing on Ubuntu Goji. And as I'm developing into being an Ubuntu Gojist, I am exposing myself to these critical seminal works that's necessary for the cleansing of my mind. And I'm learning that to be a true Ubuntu Gojist, I need to pretty much dump everything that I've learned from Western educational institutions. So we left off looking at part one, economics, and he opens this part up with a quote. And he says, all development takes place by means of self movement, not organization or direction by external forces. So that's interesting. And it's actually tried and true. This is a quote from C.L.R. James. So, all development, that includes community development, personal development, societal development, all development takes place by means of self movement. You have to move yourself, not organization or direction by external forces. So I can't force students to develop themselves or force family members to develop themselves. It starts from within. So it is within the organization itself, that is, within the society, that there must be realized new motives, new possibilities. And that's what we have to share with our children, the possibilities of a future that is not one that has oppression and prejudice and domination. The citizen is alive when he feels that he himself, in his own national community, is overcoming difficulties. Okay, so that's interesting, C.L.R. James. And if we look at this opening part of economics, he opens up with cargo cult maldevelopment. And this is a quote by Frantz Fanon. The concrete problem we find ourselves up against is not that of a choice, cost what it may, between socialism and capitalism as they have been defined by men of other continents and of other ages. So here we have the concrete problem we find ourselves up against. So I always tell my students, when you're reading something, especially heavy duty material that has new vocabulary, new concepts, it's okay to read something twice. Because a lot of times, the first time you read it, it lays the foundation and the groundwork for your mind to be able to process the concepts. So, Mortimer Adler has a book out called How to Read a Book. And he says the first read is kind of superficial reading, it's like surface reading. But the second read really helps you to unpack what is being said here. And so Fanon is saying the concrete problem we find ourselves up against is not that of a choice, cost what it may, between socialism and capitalism. So that's not the problem. He's saying as they have been defined by other continents and of other ages. So the history behind socialism and capitalism is the problem. And they have been defined by men of other continents, not Africans, and of other ages. Okay, so we have another quote here by Leopold Sedar Senghor. And he says, Africa's misfortune has been that our secret enemies, in defending their values, have made us despise our own. And so we now go around shouting slogans from their ideologies, which we are naive enough to believe in. Let us look at them. Take just the two greatest who fascinate us like serpents. Look at them. They are North Americans and Russians before they are capitalists or communists. And they are right. They use their theories to develop their nations and increase their strength. They are right. Okay, so here we have Senghor saying Africa's misfortune has been that our secret enemies. So, our secret enemies in defending their values. So, their Western values are different from our African values. So, in defending their values, they have made us despise our own. And when you think about the African value system, it's powerful, it's wonderful. How do we come to despise that value system? Okay, so our misfortune has been that our secret enemies in defending their values have made us despise our own. And so we now go around shouting slogans from their ideologies. So we're shouting things from their ideologies and their values, which we are naive enough to believe in. We know that these people are not truthful in the things that they say, yet we still believe it. Let us look at them. Take just the two greatest things that they are saying, these slogans, who fascinate us like serpents. Okay, so when you see that serpent, we watch it, it's fascinating. Look at them. Okay, so the two greatest, we have North Americans and then we have Russians. All right. Before they are capitalists, so the North Americans purport capitalism as being the best and only way to, having a strong market, or communist, where they're saying no, it should not be market driven. It should be driven by the labor, and the people that actually work for it should get it. And they are right. They use their theories. So North Americans are using their own theories to support capitalism, whereas Russians are using their own theories to support communism to develop their nations. Okay, so North Americans developed their nation using their theories and capitalism and increase their strength. Same thing with the Russians, using their theories to develop their nations and increase their strength. And they are right. Yes, they are right regarding their values, but not the African values. So, following the collapse of Cancun, of North South negotiations, South South cooperation is replacing it as a panacea for third world underdevelopment. It aims to build a third world economic system by creating regional economic unions, free trade areas, financial and monetary linkages, um, as well as by promoting scientific, technical and cultural exchanges among third world countries. But how reasonable is it to expect that merely by inserting existing national development programs into third world counterparts of the EEC, and the COMECON, World Bank, IMF, GATT, etc., development would be achieved? Would it also be necessary to dismantle, as dependency theory implies, the plundering linkages which bind the third world to the West? So I love how he poses these questions here. So let me reread this question. Would it also be necessary to dismantle, as dependency theory implies? So dependency theory implies dismantling the plundering linkages which bind the third world to the West. And these are devastating linkages on all levels. And whether or not that is necessary, what else must the third world do? Unless these questions are correctly answered, South South cooperation could become yet another in the series of ineffectual panaceas offered to the third world since World War II. Three panaceas have been offered. Okay, so he's saying panaceas. And panacea is still death, but three have been offered. Three panaceas have been offered by the principal schools of development experts. First, the liberalogues, who purport to derive theirs from the history of the capitalist transformation in the Western Bloc of the North. They recommend that third world countries should persevere in the capitalist approach to development, which had been introduced under colonialism. Okay, so they're saying, oh, you guys, you need to persevere in the capitalist approach. Now keep in mind, this is like a game. I liken it to a game. And they are in charge of the game. So they're saying we should persevere in this capitalist game that we design and that we control. Okay. Second, okay, let's do second in a different color. So here we have the Marxists, who presumably derived theirs from the history of the socialist transformation in the Eastern Bloc of the North. They urge the third world to reject the capitalist road altogether, to expropriate the capitalists and build socialism instead. Okay, so that sounds nice. Still, it's European ideology, so is that really for us? And third, the dependency theorists. They say that the structure of the existing economic order, with its international division of labor, its terms of trade, its system for inequitably setting, so its system for inequitably setting the prices of raw materials and finished products, is responsible for chronic underdevelopment in the third world. And they recommend that third world countries, capitalist roaders and socialist roaders alike, should together press for a new international economic order whose structures would be in their favor. Okay, that was a lot. So, third, the dependency theorists. They say that the structure of the existing economic order is responsible. So now the structure of the existing order is responsible for chronic underdevelopment in the third world. And they recommend that third world countries, capitalist roaders and socialist roaders alike, should together press for a new international economic order. Most third world countries are now well into the third decade of their post colonial development effort. Now, keep in mind, this was written in the 80s, so we're way past that third decade. But in his preface, Chinweizu urged us to just read this for the time that it was written, so we'll stay in that time. Okay, so most third world countries are now well into the third decade of their post colonial development effort, but they have little to show for it in spite of the campaign for a new international economic order and regardless of whether they have followed the capitalist or socialist recipes. And that still applies. Yet in industrialized countries like the USA, the USSR, which is Russia, and Japan, the fundamental transformation from feudal or agrarian capitalist society into an industrial nation state, whether capitalist or socialist, was demonstrably accomplished in approximately 30 years. Wow, that's not a lot of time at all. 30 years. That's, if you live up to 90, that's what, 3 lifetimes, right? Well, I wouldn't say 3 lifetimes, but 30 years is not long at all compared to, you know, 500 years of plundering. In the USA, this was done between 1865, when the American Civil War ended, and 1898 when the Spanish American War took place. Now, in the USSR, it was done between 1917, when the Socialist Revolution took place, and 1939, when World War II began. And in Japan, so now we got a nice little comparison here. I wanted to do Japan in a different color. So in Japan, it was done between 1868, the year of the Meiji Restoration, and 1904, when the Russo-Japanese War began. So, for development to have succeeded in the North by capitalist and socialist recipes alike, and for it to have failed in the Third World by both recipes, suggests that factors not in contention between capitalism and socialism could be obstructing Third World development. Because both recipes were followed, yet still there's no progress. Similarly, the inability of the Third World to negotiate reforms in the world economic system suggests that dependency theory, for all its advance on liberal log and Marxist explanations, has not touched the heart of the matter. So that's interesting. So, in a sense, dependency theory is kind of lightweight because it has not gotten to the heart of the matter. So, a fresh look at the nature and failings of third world development efforts is needed. A similar examination of the development histories of leading industrial nations, both capitalist and socialist, may help uncover some crucial secrets of development and thus pinpoint what else third world countries must do. Interesting. So that's the first section of part one, economics. Great introduction. Now he's going into cargo cult consumerism. Okay. So he says, in order to appreciate the nature of existing third world approaches to development, it is useful to begin seemingly far afield by looking at the cargo cults, which arose in, is that Melanesia, in the days of European colonial rule. The cargo cults believed that the gods and their spirit agents were packing manufactured goods into crates, labeling them with Melanesian names and addresses, and loading them into the holds of ships and planes. When the cargo of rice, preserved meats, clothing, guns, lamps, tobacco, etc., arrived, cult members would be freed from the need ever again to work or pay taxes. To induce those spirit agents to bring the cargo, cult members had to perform rituals involving military parades, flag raising and lowering, and meticulous observation of the rules of club organization. And in preparation for the extended cargo, airstrips, wharves, and immense warehouses were built. Therefore, cult members would wait and wait and wait. Eventually, the failure of the cargo to arrive would be blamed on the malice of Europeans who, it was held, had intercepted the shipments, altered the addresses, and diverted the cargo elsewhere. These cargo cults arose among peoples who had a magico religious world outlook. Magico religious world outlook. Interesting. Who had marginal contact with industrial civilization, who saw how the few European colonizers in their midst obtained manufactured goods, but who were unable to see, let alone understand, the nature of the manufacturing and commerce which created and brought these goods to their shores. fixing upon some aspects of the behavior of the Europeans, they interpreted them as rituals for obtaining material goods from the gods. By reenacting them, they fully expected to be rewarded, just like the Europeans. The elites of the third world may laugh at the naivety of the cargo cult votaries, but what have so far passed for development efforts in the third world bear much resemblance to the cargo cult ritualism. True, third world elites are far more knowledgeable about industrial civilization, having heard of or seen or worked in factories. They are able to connect industrial production with the manufactured goods they craved. But they still show confusion about the fundamentals of industrial culture and about how to organize an industrial economy. Their greater contact with industrial society notwithstanding, they have invented a cult of development whose rituals they enact with much the same devotion and futility as I can't get it right. Melanesian cargo cult members devote to theirs. Okay, so let me read that sentence again. Their greater contact with industrial society, notwithstanding, they have invented a cult of development whose rituals they enact with much the same devotion and futility as Melanesian cargo cult members devote to theirs. That's a lot to unpack. In present day counterparts of cargo cults, the great and expected cargo ship, the bringer of consumer goods, is a mysterious process called development. Okay, so here's where the analogy connects. All right. So the bringer of the consumer goods is a mysterious process called development. And I like how he said mysterious process. I chuckle because remember, he just showed us that the USA did it in about 30 years, Russia did it in about 30 years, Japan did it about 30 years. But yet, this mysterious process for the African and the continent has never happened. It has never happened. All right. So the industrial countries of the North are the gods, okay, and spirit agents. Okay, so the North includes USA, Russia, right? The magico religious rites are those of development planning. Huh. Okay, so these rituals, these magical religious rituals, are a part of development planning, infrastructure building, and foreign investment. Wow. It's a silly analogy, but it makes sense. Third world governments have, accordingly, drawn up development plans and devoted considerable effort to building such physical infrastructures as highways, airports, telecommunication systems, warehouses, assembly plants, turnkey factories, and industrial parks. And that's true. These governments, even today, are working with Chinese governments. So you have African governments working with Chinese governments to build these physical infrastructures. They're building highways, they're building airports, telecommunication systems, warehouses, assembly plants, turnkey factories, and industrial parks. They have also assiduously embarked on building such institutional infrastructures as universities, think tanks, research agencies, and state owned economic corporations. In countries where capitalism is favored, men of business make much of company letterheads, business suits, briefcases, elaborate business cards, and boardroom titles. Similarly, the men of labor make much of trade unions, strikes, and cooperatives. Where socialist revolution is favored, okay, so we got socialists versus capitalism. Okay. So, where socialist revolution is favored, much is made of popular mobilization, popular organization, cadres, people's committees, vanguards, collectivization, and other organizational forms and rights gleaned from the histories and practices of the industrial socialist countries of the North. When the first spurt of national infrastructure building failed to produce the desired cargo of development, additional rituals were invented. A ritual of North South dialogue was started to persuade the guardian spirits of development to bring aid, to transfer technology, and to grant better terms of trade. Okay, so here, a ritual of North South dialogue. And this ritual is still today. They started this to persuade the guardian spirits of development to bring aid, transfer technology, grant better terms of trade. When this ritual also failed, Third World spokesmen resorted to blaming the West for holding up Third World development. Like the Melanesian cargo cult votaries, they accuse selfish Westerners of blocking aid to the Third World, of putting up protectionist barriers against Third World exports, and of avar, let's see, avariciously, avariciously. Okay, that's a new one for me. I'm going to have to look that word up. Avariciously refusing to negotiate away their trading advantages. They accuse the North of inhumanity, of lack of altruism, and they sourly turn to the building of more infrastructure, international infrastructure this time, which they hope will solve the riddle of development. The mysterious process. I just inserted that. That was not in the text. Hence the calls for South South cooperation to establish more economic groupings and agencies like the already existing ACP, ECOWAS, SADCC, OPEC, and the ADP. Okay, so ADP and ADB as in boy. But how much closer to development would many more of such organizations take the third world? And that's why he opened with that quote from C.L.R. James about development being starting from within, right? Not external forces. The failures of the Melanesian cargo cults and of the third world development result alike from a superficial understanding of industrial culture. Wow, a superficial understanding, meaning we don't really know the game that these Europeans are playing. We have an artificial understanding because we've gone to their schools, we've read their books, but it's still superficial. They have grasped some of its forms, but not its essence. Rather, predictably, superficial understanding has led to ineffectual recipes. So when we tried the capitalist way, we did it with a superficial understanding. When we tried the communist way, we did it with a superficial understanding. And the dependency theorist doesn't even get at the heart of the matter. So that's where the insanity is coming in. They have grasped some of its forms, but not its essence. And I don't think we can grasp the essence because that's the secret that is kept amongst the North, right? So we can't necessarily get at the essence. And even if we did, the way of the North is not the way of the South. And keep in mind, a lot of the people from the North have like 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. So that should say a lot there. So rather predictably, superficial understanding has led to ineffectual recipes. Okay, so we can predict that, absolutely. But whereas the failure of the cargo cults is perfectly understandable, given their total lack of acquaintance with the industrial production, the failure of third world elites is not. After all, these include scientists, engineers, economists, bankers, merchants, and other trained professionals who have had intimate access to the industrial societies of the North. If they have not grasped the essence of industrialism, what has prevented them? Hmm, that's a good question because I know if you are working in some of these positions in the North as a scientist, engineer, economist, banker, merchant, or other trained professional, in some cases you don't get but so far um, because there are ceilings. So the question is, if they have not grasped the essence of industrialism, what has prevented them? Okay, so let's see here. A considerable part of their failure probably derives from the liberal and Marxist ideologues who have so far dominated third world development theory, policy, and practice, especially these neoliberals, liberal and Marxist ideologues. In their antagonism, these rival ideologues have concentrated attention on the difference between capitalist and socialist recipes. But what the third world might more usefully focus upon could well be the practical similarities between East and West and how these set Northern success apart from the third world failure. For if the third world must imitate the Northern pioneers of development, it should imitate the efficacious parts of Northern procedures. But what might these be? Okay, so I want to highlight that question. So that's a lot to unpack there. So he's saying, but what the third world might more usefully focus upon could well be the practical similarities between East and West and how these set Northern success apart from third world failure. Okay, so we got capitalists, we have socialists. We look at the practical similarities between the two, and then between the East and the West, and how it brought about Northern success and third world failure. For if the third world must imitate the Northern pioneers of development, so if we have to imitate the capitalists or the socialists, it should imitate the efficacious parts, so the most efficient, effective parts of the Northern procedures. But what might these be? Okay, so we are going to stop there and let it marinate, let it process. I know I'm going to let it process. All right, see you next time.